All right, so let's get right into it. We're going to break down the story of Kafano Jordan, who you probably know as Shotti. This is the guy who was, for a time, right at the very heart of the whole Tr3way enterprise.
And you gotta understand, at his peak, this wasn't just some guy on the block. He was the manager, the muscle, behind one of the biggest and, let's be real, most controversial music stars on the planet, Tekashi 6ix9ine. I mean, he was holding the keys to a whole kingdom, one built entirely on chaos and a whole lot of cash.
2031. That's the year he's supposed to get out of federal prison. We're talking more than a decade from now. So you have to ask yourself, with all that power, all that money, how did it all just fall apart so spectacularly?
And that's really the big question we're digging into. Because just this year, in 2024, Shotti tried to get out early. He made this plea for compassionate release, said he was a changed man, had serious health problems. But the court, they didn't just say no. They slammed the door shut, hard. So the real question is, why?
Well, the answer isn't just buried in a bunch of legal papers. If you really want to get why he's still behind bars, and honestly, why the whole Tr3way thing was probably doomed from the get-go, it all comes down to one single, powerful term from the streets.
Okay, so first up, let's look at that legal motion. What exactly did his lawyers argue, and why did it just completely fail?
You know, on paper, his legal team actually made a pretty solid case. They used the First Step Act, they brought up a really painful medical condition he has, chronic pancreatitis. They talked about how rough the conditions are in prison, constant lockdowns. And they made the claim that Shotti had found religion, that he was totally rehabilitated, that the guy from 2018, he was long gone.
But the court just wasn't buying it. And what's really interesting is that it wasn't even about his health claims. The whole rejection boiled down to one single devastating phrase: a danger to the community. The judge essentially said, look, the stuff you did was so serious, your past is so violent, we just can't ignore it.
And that violent past, that's what brings us back to that key term I mentioned earlier. See, to really get the judge's decision, you have to understand the behavior that landed Shotti there to begin with. We need to dissect the anatomy of what the streets call a crash out.
This right here, this is the key to everything. So what is a crash out? It's a term for someone who just can't see beyond the heat of the moment. They will literally throw everything away, money, freedom, their entire future, all for a quick, emotional, and usually violent reaction to feeling disrespected. It's basically self-destruction as a way of life.
And here's what's so wild. This isn't just slang. It lines up perfectly with a real concept in criminology called low self-control theory. I mean, look at the traits. Impulsive, takes huge risks, can't think long-term, and always chooses violence over talking it out. It's almost like a clinical diagnosis for the exact behavior that blew up their entire operation. This wasn't just a few bad choices, it was a totally predictable pattern. So, you want to see this theory in action? All you have to do is look at one single absolutely chaotic month back in 2018. This was a month of pure mayhem that pretty much handed the feds their entire case on a silver platter. I mean, this timeline is it's staggering. Think about it. April 3rd, an armed robbery in an office building in the middle of Manhattan. And who's filming it? Their own star artist. Then, not even 3 weeks later, there's a fight inside a packed Barclays Center that ends with a gun going off. And then, get this, later that same night, Shotti himself is firing shots at a car in Brooklyn. It's just a perfect storm of impulsive, reckless, high-risk behavior. And here's the kicker. None of this was strategic. These weren't smart business moves to, expand their turf. Nope. These were all impulsive, ego-driven, super high-profile acts of violence. All it did was paint a giant target on their backs for the FBI. I mean, it is the textbook definition of a crash out. But this behavior, this crashing out, it wasn't just a personal problem for Shotti. It was actually baked right into their entire, very modern business model. A model you could basically call the clout-to-prison pipeline. And this is where you see this huge paradox in how they operated, right? Think about old-school organized crime. The whole point is to be invisible, to operate in the shadows. But the Tr3way model, it was the complete opposite. Their goal was to be as visible as humanly possible. They were all about chasing clout on social media, which really just means they were creating a perfect digital trail of evidence for the prosecutors to follow. I mean, when you really break it down, their business plan sounds like a dark joke. It's this uniquely 21st century tragedy. Step 1. Commit violent acts on camera. Step 2. Go online and brag about it to get clout. Step 3. Turn that clout into money. But
They totally forgot about the final and most obvious step. Step 4, provide federal prosecutors with a ready-made RICO case. Their entire road to fame was also the direct road to a federal indictment.
And you know, this trap didn't just snapshot on Shotti. It got everyone at the top. And it led to two very different, but you could argue equally grim, fates for the two biggest names involved.
So on one hand, you've got Shotti. He chose to stay loyal to the code of the streets. He refused to cooperate, and for that, he got 15 years. He's doing what they call hard time. Then, on the other hand, you have 6ix9ine. He chose the exact opposite path, cooperation. He testified against everybody and was out in just 2 years. But what did he get? This kind of chaotic freedom. He's living a life of paranoia, constant online drama, and always getting into trouble. In a way, they're both trapped, just in very different kinds of prisons.
And when you look at the entire leadership team, you really see the full cost. Shotti, the manager and street boss, gets 15 years. 6ix9ine, the artist and the money guy, is free but can't seem to stay out of jail or probation trouble. Mel Murda, the Godfather figure, is still doing over 11 years. The price for being at the top of this crash-out enterprise was, quite literally, decades of their lives.
So it really leaves you with a tough question, doesn't it? Who actually won in all of this? Was it the guy who is technically free but can't stay out of jail? Or was it the guy who stayed loyal and is now trapped inside for years to come? It seems like in the architecture of a crash out, every single exit just leads you right into another kind of trap.